Most women don't realize this, but the deepest part of a man's desire is not for beauty or sex or even companionship. It is for something far more forbidden. He craves the mystery he cannot control. He longs for the feminine force that both devastates and liberates him, the shadow woman who mirrors his unspoken fears back into his face. And no one, perhaps in all of psychology, understood this paradox more intimately than Carl Jung. Jung in love was not like other men. He was a man torn between the sacred and the profane, between intellect and obsession, between control and surrender. And in his writings, in his private journals, and in the silent corners of his own relationships, Jung revealed a truth few dare to say out loud. Men fear the feminine shadow because they cannot survive it unchanged. If a man truly falls in love, not with a persona, not with the soft mask of a compliant partner, but with a woman who embodies her dark, spiritual power, he will come face to face with the forbidden side of his own psyche. This woman becomes not just his lover, but his mirror. She evokes what Jung called the anima, the mystical feminine blueprint embedded in every man's unconscious. And here's the terrifying part. The anima is not always kind. She seduces, withdraws, punishes, forgives, entices, and vanishes. She carries both the heavenly mother and the devouring goddess within her form. Has this ever happened to you? Have you felt a man pull away not because he lost interest, but because he got too close to something he could not explain? Perhaps you thought it was your fault. You blamed yourself for being too intense, too emotional, too much. But in truth, you were standing at the edge of his psychic abyss. You became the portal through which his unconscious tried to awaken him, and not every man is ready for that. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But most men are terrified of being transformed by love. They do not want to dissolve into something new. They want to possess, to categorize, to remain sovereign. Yet the kind of woman Jung secretly described in his work, the woman who activates the shadow, does not allow this. She awakens him to his unlived life. She reflects his hidden longings, his buried wounds, his primal desires he has tried to tame. She is not a safe woman. She is an archetype in flesh. In Jung's personal red book, the sacred text he wrote but kept hidden for much of his life, he describes visions of feminine figures that haunted and seduced him. Salome, the blind prophetess, the serpent woman who danced between love and destruction. He documented these visions not as fantasies, but as psychic revelations. They revealed what every man encounters if he dares to step beyond shallow desire. The reality that true intimacy strips him of ego, exposes his control mechanisms, and forces him to confront his own vulnerability. This is why so many men crave the dark feminine but retreat from her when she appears. The modern world teaches women to soften their edges, to downplay their mystery, to make love easy and digestible. But depth psychology teaches something radically different. Your mystery is your medicine. Your shadows are not liabilities. They are invitations. The woman who embodies her whole self, darkness included, becomes not just a lover, but a catalyst. Do you know how many women shrink themselves to avoid triggering a man's fear of transformation? They sense his hesitation, his silent confessions of overwhelm, and they try to dim their own power. But the woman who understands Jung's teachings knows this is not her burden to carry. His fear is not her failure. His withdrawal is not a sign she should become less. It is a sign she touched a part of him he was not yet ready to face. And yet the paradox remains. He will remember her. Maybe not consciously, maybe not in words, but in dreams, in quiet moments, in regrets whispered only to himself. She will remain the unfinished story in his psyche. The woman who becomes a man's anima projection, whether she wants to or not, will always linger in the corridors of his unconscious mind. The deeper you understand this, the more you realize feminine power is not about seduction. It is about reflection. It is not about getting a man to want you in the shallow sense, but about becoming the mirror he cannot escape. Carl Jung knew this intimately. In love, he was a man possessed by his own shadows, tormented by visions of women who embodied more than physical attraction. They were symbols of his inner fragmentation, carriers of both healing and danger. Some women, whether they intend to or not, embody the archetype of the transformative feminine. And this does something irreversible to a man. It splits him between his ego and his soul, between the life he's constructed and the life his unconscious demands he live, between comfort and awakening. What would you think if I told you that many men don't fear rejection from women? They fear being seen too deeply. They fear being exposed to the rawness of their own desires, the contradictions they've hidden, the chaos they've tamed into routine. When a woman enters his life who does not conform to the usual roles, when she carries the depth of her own dark and sacred feminine, he feels something ancient stir inside him, an echo of the forbidden, a longing for something he knows will undo him. Jung called this confrontation with the feminine shadow a necessary wound. It is not about romance or the polished rituals of modern dating. It is about soul alchemy, the dissolving of the ego's false safety nets. The man who meets this kind of woman encounters his own anima in living form. She is not there to soothe his insecurities, but to awaken them, because only through that rupture can he begin his individuation. And yet, most men retreat. They choose safety over transformation. They marry the version of love that asks nothing dangerous of them. They choose relationships that allow them to remain asleep. But deep down, they never forget the woman who forced them to see their true selves. She becomes the ghost they revisit in moments of silence, the image they carry into dreams. She is not always a literal woman. They may never speak again. But her imprint lingers like a secret code written into their psychology. This is the hidden confession of men who desire what they fear. They want the woman who sees through them, but they cannot bear the cost of being dismantled. And for the woman who holds this power, there is often loneliness. She wonders why men pull away, why love seems intense but fleeting, why connections ignite quickly but collapse under their own weight. It is not because she is too much, but because she is too real, too reflective, too close to his unspoken wounds. Jung's writings on love are not simple. They do not offer the clean resolutions that mainstream relationship advice promises. Instead, they point to the dark waters beneath attraction, to the unconscious forces that pull two people together, not for comfort, but for transformation. Some women are mirrors. They reflect back to a man his own capacity for depth, for vulnerability, for self-destruction and rebirth. She may look like a lover, but she is in truth an initiator, a portal, an archetype in motion. This is why her love life does not follow ordinary rules. She will not be the woman men casually date and forget. She will be the woman who alters the trajectory of a man's inner life. The one he remembers when his ego dissolves. The one he thinks of in moments of regret or in the silences between waking and sleep. If you are this kind of woman, understand this. Your task is not to dim your power. It is to hold it gracefully, without apology. To understand that you are not here to be easily digested, but to call forth the hidden confessions of those who dare to love you. There will be men who crave you and run from you in the same breath. That is not your failure. It is the nature of shadow work disguised as romance. Some women are meant to be the safe harbor. Others are meant to be the storm. And the man who chooses to step into the storm willingly will never be the same again. Jung once wrote, The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation is rarely gentle. It burns. It exposes. It consumes the parts of us that no longer serve our evolution. And nowhere is this more true than when a man encounters the archetypal feminine shadow embodied in a woman who refuses to shrink. What does the feminine shadow look like? It is not cruelty. It is not manipulation. It is not dominance in the shallow sense. It is something far more unsettling. It is the invitation to see the parts of himself he has buried, his longing for vulnerability, his suppressed need for emotional intimacy, his secret hunger to surrender to something larger than his ego. Men who have spent years armoring themselves against emotional exposure find this unbearable, yet they are drawn to it over and over again. This is the paradox of desire Jung exposes. The human being longs for the very thing that dismantles them. Most women are taught to hide this power, to soften it, to make themselves palatable, to silence the wild, intuitive knowing that makes men uncomfortable. But the woman who embodies the feminine shadow refuses to do this. She is not cruel, but she is clear. She does not apologize for the mirror she holds up to a man's soul. And what happens when she does? Some men will ghost her. Some will chase her and then resent her. Some will call her names to minimize the threat she poses to their internal order. But none will forget her. Because in the world of shadow dynamics, forgetting is impossible. The reason Carl Jung's insights into love feel so dangerous is because they reveal that most human relationships are unconscious contracts, built not on truth, but on mutual concealment. People agree silently to keep each other comfortable. They maintain the status quo. They avoid the depths because the depths demand sacrifice. But the woman who lives in her full spectrum, her light and her shadow, breaks this contract the moment she enters a man's life. She triggers his anima, the feminine image buried in his unconscious. And for many men, this confrontation feels like obsession, like craving, like terror. He may think it is about her body, her beauty, or her charisma, but it is about something much older than that. It is about the archetypal feminine energy she represents, the one he has been avoiding in himself. Desire, in Jungian terms, is never just about the other person. It is about what that person awakens in you. That's why a man can be with many women, but never forget the one who shattered his illusions. She becomes the axis of his inner life, long after the relationship dissolves. And for women, understanding this brings power, but also responsibility. You cannot carry this energy unconsciously. It must be handled with grace, with integrity, with compassion for the men who are not ready, and detachment from those who try to control or diminish you. Because here is the unspoken truth. Some men would rather destroy the woman who exposes their shadow than face themselves. They will accuse her of being too much. They will say she is too intense, too emotional, too complicated. But these are not reflections of her. They are confessions of his own limits. So what does a woman do knowing this? She stands still. She refuses to beg for love or acceptance. She refuses to shrink. She lets the man decide, will he rise to meet his own depth, or will he retreat into the comfort of his previous life? This is not arrogance. It is self-respect. The woman who knows her own psychological depth cannot pretend otherwise. She cannot pretend to be ordinary. She cannot make herself small to soothe another person's fear. And so, she becomes a catalyst, a spiritual mirror, a dangerous love story. Jung teaches that the feminine shadow is not meant to be exiled. It is meant to be integrated. But not every man is willing to do this work. Some will choose the easier path. Others will spiral into cycles of obsession and distance, craving her presence, while resenting the transformation she demands. But a few, just a few, will step fully into the fire, and those men will be reborn. In the silent corridors of a man's mind, there are rooms he dares not enter alone. These are the places where his fears sit beside his desires, where his longing to possess collides with his terror of losing control. And when a woman carries both beauty and depth, both softness and shadow, she becomes the key to those forbidden chambers. She becomes the trigger for his deepest transformation or his deepest unraveling. Carl Jung understood this paradox. He wrote not just about love, but about what love awakens. Not the surface romance, but the confrontation between the persona, the mask, and the self. When a man falls for a woman who embodies both sensuality and spiritual power, he isn't just falling for her, he's falling into himself, into the unknown. Some men run from this. They replace intimacy with conquest. They pursue physical desire while retreating from emotional exposure. They become collectors of moments rather than builders of connection. Why? Because true intimacy demands a death of the ego. And for many men, that is too high a price. But love, real love, cannot exist without ego death. It is not a transaction. It is not about roles or control. It is a psychological earthquake, a spiritual rebirth, and most men are not taught how to survive it. In Jung's view, the anima, the feminine part of a man's unconscious, is the guide to his own soul. But if he resists her, she becomes chaotic. She turns into projection, obsession, neediness, rage. He may chase a woman not because he wants her, but because he wants to silence the parts of himself she wakes up. This is why so many men crave women who reflect innocence, but secretly desire women who carry danger. It's why they pursue safe relationships while fantasizing about women who make them feel alive. The feminine shadow is not a cliché. It is the ancient force that forces a man to see his suppressed chaos. But not every woman knows how to carry this energy wisely. Some women, wounded by rejection or betrayal, weaponize the feminine shadow. They use seduction not as connection, but as control. They trigger desire only to withdraw it. They punish rather than invite growth. This is not empowerment. It is projection. It is pain recycling itself. The empowered feminine shadow does not destroy men. She reveals them. She does not manipulate their desire. She teaches them to understand it. She holds space for transformation, but she does not force it. She is both mirror and mystery, both invitation and boundary. For women watching this, here's the dangerous truth. When you live in your full feminine depth, you will attract men who cannot handle you. Men who will try to minimize you, possess you, or ghost you. You will be blamed for their discomfort. You will be called too emotional or too complex. But do not fold. Your depth is not a liability. It is a spiritual filter. It separates the men who are ready to meet you at the soul level from the men who are not. It exposes who is willing to confront his own shadow and who will project that shadow onto you. Some men, when faced with a woman's depth, will vanish into silence. Others will obsess from a distance, unable to let go but too afraid to step forward. A rare few will choose to stay in the fire, to let themselves be dismantled and rebuilt. And for those men, the love they experience will be unlike anything they've ever known. It will be a descent into the unconscious, into archetypes, into primal truths they were never taught to name. It will be terrifying, and it will be holy. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the integration of shadow and light, the death of the mask, the birth of the authentic self. But here's what most people don't understand. Individuation is not just a solitary journey. It happens in relationships. It happens in the mirror of love, in the friction of desire, in the collision of masculine fear and feminine depth. It happens when a man stops running from the woman who makes him feel alive, and instead asks himself why aliveness feels so dangerous. And for women, The lesson is this: never apologize for being the woman who triggers growth. Never apologize for being the woman who cannot be consumed, only met. The man who is ready will not shrink from your depth. He will rise into it. Desire is not innocent. It carries with it the weight of history, the man's personal history, the ancestral history, the evolutionary history of survival, domination, and fear. When a man desires a woman beyond the surface, he is not just desiring her body. He is desiring the mystery that her presence ignites in him. And that mystery is often tied to his unconscious wounds. Carl Jung warned us of this. The unconscious does not forget. It does not negotiate. It does not care about social roles or polite conversations. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in obsessions that make no sense to the rational mind. This is why love becomes dangerous for men who have not faced their inner worlds. A man may meet a woman who embodies warmth, wisdom, sensuality, and depth, and suddenly he feels both drawn to her and terrified of her. She represents the very thing he has suppressed in himself, the emotional vulnerability he's been taught to reject, the chaos he's tried to avoid, the surrender he's been conditioned to fear. So he stands at the edge of her presence, oscillating between craving and avoidance. If he pursues her recklessly, he risks turning his obsession into possession. If he retreats, he risks numbing himself into apathy. Both are traps of the unintegrated masculine. But if he stays, if he allows himself to feel the discomfort, the trembling, the ego collapse, he touches something sacred. Jung called this the alchemical marriage, the union of opposites. In the unconscious of every man, the feminine is not just an image. She is a force. She is the anima, the doorway to his soul. But if he cannot face her within, he will chase her outside of himself, through lust, conquest, or codependent love. This creates cycles of obsession that look like passion, but are actually psychological projection. The man says, "I can't live without her." What he means is, I cannot live without the part of myself she awakens. And for women, this is where your power becomes both delicate and dangerous. You must know this: when you embody both light and shadow, you are not simply attractive. You are activating. You are not just a woman in his life, you become a mirror for his spiritual evolution. Some will rise, some will shatter, some will run, some will try to possess what cannot be possessed. The woman who carries depth must understand how to hold that power wisely, not by dimming herself to make men comfortable, not by rescuing men from their own unraveling, but by standing in her center, unshaken by projections, knowing that not every man is ready to meet her at the level of soul. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. When a woman lives in her embodied feminine, when she refuses to become an emotional caretaker for unready men, she becomes what Jung would call the transformative archetype, the priestess, the shadow queen, the forbidden muse. She teaches without teaching. She calls forth growth without forcing change. She understands that true love is not about making a man comfortable. It is about inviting him to meet his own unconscious with courage. And if he cannot, she lets him go. With softness, not bitterness. With grace, not punishment. For she knows desire that is not met with inner work becomes suffering. And she refuses to be the object of suffering for men who refuse to grow. But what about the men who are ready? The ones who choose to stay in the fire? For those men, the path is brutal and beautiful. They will face their shadow selves, their need for control, their fear of abandonment, their wounds of rejection. They will confront the mother complex, the father wound, the ancestral trauma buried beneath their skin. They will feel small, then vast, weak, then powerful, broken, then whole. And they will understand what love really is. Not possession, not control, but transformation. Carl Jung in Love was not speaking of romance. He was speaking of individuation through connection, of finding the self through the mirror of the other, of dying to the old identity to be reborn in wholeness. This is why so many men fear deep women, because deep women require ego death. But for the man who is willing to walk through that death, what awaits is not loss. It is resurrection. He becomes not just a lover, but a man who has met his soul. Some men never return from that threshold. They hover at the gates of transformation, unwilling to relinquish control, terrified of letting go. They retreat into shallow relationships, transactional connections, or emotional numbness, because that feels safer than standing naked before the feminine shadow. But the man who stays, he becomes rare. He understands that desire is not a weakness, it is a summons, a call from the depths of his psyche, echoing from the unconscious, pulling him toward wholeness. And the woman he desires becomes the symbol of that calling, not because she is his possession, but because she is his mirror. Carl Jung warned us, when we project, we confuse the outer world with the inner one. And nowhere is this confusion more dangerous than in love. The man says, she completes me, but Jung would whisper, no, she reflects the parts of yourself you have abandoned. This is the secret dance between the masculine and the feminine in psychological development. Each is both separate and connected, divided and fused, distinct yet in dialogue. The man who understands this does not worship the woman as a savior, nor does he reduce her to an object of conquest. He sees her as a reflection of his own inner work. And for the woman? She must know the cost of becoming that reflection. A woman who embodies both desire and detachment becomes emotionally dangerous to unready men. She cannot be manipulated because she has met her own shadow. She has befriended solitude, embraced silence, and faced the grief of being misunderstood. She no longer fears being alone because she is already whole. This makes her magnetic. Men orbit her not because she tries to attract them, but because she exists in the rare frequency of emotional sovereignty. Her aura whispers to the unconscious masculine, I am not here to heal you. I am here to invite you to heal yourself. Some men will be enchanted by this. Others will be enraged. But the woman who knows her shadow does not tremble in the face of projection. She understands that love, at this level, is not about making life easier. It is about making life real. Carl Jung once wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is why the feminine shadow is so threatening to men, because she forces them to confront the reality that what they call fate is often self-sabotage. What they call heartbreak is often refusal to grow. What they call love is often projection of unmet needs. The woman who knows this stands in radical self-possession. She does not explain her silence. She does not justify her standards. She does not chase validation because she understands the game being played beneath the surface. She knows when a man says, I love you, but cannot face his own reflection. It is not love he's offering. It is dependency, and she will not carry that weight. Instead, she becomes the woman who lets men face their desires without rescuing them from the consequences. She holds space for their transformation but does not interfere with their unraveling. For true love is not about saving someone from their shadow. It is about being willing to sit beside them as they walk through it. Some men will never understand this. They will blame the woman for their discomfort. They will accuse her of being too much, too complicated, or too detached. But beneath those accusations is a confession they cannot speak aloud. I desire what I fear, and I fear what I desire. Carl Jung in Love teaches us this paradox. Desire is not safe. It pulls us into the parts of ourselves we've denied, shunned, or buried. It demands shadow work. It asks for death and rebirth, not of the body, but of the ego. The feminine shadow is not here to be tamed. She is here to be integrated. And when a man learns to love without possession, to desire without control, to be vulnerable without collapse, that is when he truly meets the feminine in her full power, not as an object but as a reflection. not as a fantasy but as a teacher, not as a solution but as a catalyst. The woman who knows this moves through life with quiet confidence, unbothered by shallow desires, unwilling to shrink for fragile egos. For she understands, the man who fears her depth is confessing more than he knows, and the man who embraces it is becoming more than he was. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.